Mary had a little lamb.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
We will be looking at a national emergency because I don't think anything's going to happen. I think the Democrats don't want border security. And when I hear them talking about the fact that walls are immoral and walls don't work, they know they work. I watched somebody being interviewed the other day by a very good anchor. And the anchor actually was getting angrier and angrier as they tried to explain how a wall doesn't really have that much of an impact. And yet thousands of people are on one side of the wall and nobody's on the other side of the wall. It was actually laughable and really horrible in the same breath. So that's the way it is. You know, if you look at El Paso, if you look at certain places, but El Paso was one of the most dangerous cities in the whole country. Once the wall was completed, it became one of the safest immediately. It wasn't like it took 5 years. Some of you know this. Immediately, it became one of the safest cities in the whole country. So we're building the wall. A lot of it is, I mean, the chant now should be finish the wall as opposed to build the wall, because we're building a lot of wall.
He's not building any wall. In fact, today he tweeted that maybe he'll build a human wall. I'm not kidding. The amazing human wall, everybody. He said he'd build it out of humans. That's not going to work for Ann Coulter. She hates humans. She doesn't want a wall made of humans. She wants some sort of a concrete wall, which, you know, the drug cartels will put stained glass windows in and French doors. I mean, this is just unbelievable. So he said, quote, "We have sent additional military. We will build a human wall if necessary. If we had a real wall, this would be a non-event." So forget putting people on the ramparts. He wants people to be the ramparts. I don't know who this is worse for. Is this worse for families fleeing violence or the families who have to try and stop them? He's using families to destroy families. That is so, completely fascist. I've never seen anything like it in my life. It sounds like the worst reboot of that movie, Soylent Green. The wall are people. They're people. What the... Where's Charlton Heston when you need him? Oh, my God. This is just so unbelievable. So tonight is the State of the Union. So anybody want to take a guess at whether or not he will declare a national emergency or he won't declare a national emergency? Because this is the big question. This is the reason why people are going to watch. They're certainly not going to watch for any other reason because listen, I went through last year's State of the Union. That's, I went through the 2018 to see what he said and has it happened. And the answer is he said the same thing he's going to say this year about, this is a year for unity. This is a year he's going to call for unity. Last year he called for unity too. But in his mind, unity means everybody agrees with him. United, they agree with whatever fantastical, thing is in his head. This is what he means by unity. This is, and if the only reason why you're watching is to see if he declares a national emergency, join me because I have to watch. Obviously, I have to watch. But, if I didn't have to, I would probably not because this is just another chance for him to troll Americans. That's all he ever does. He says stupid things. And he trolls us all the time. I'll build a human wall. That's trolling. That is just bullcrap. That is just bizarre. That is insane. Want to see something really cool? This is the Washington Post. They did this, and I saw it this morning. I was like, oh, I can't wait to show it to you. Here is the State of the Union from last year, highlighting in the, you know how they do the white dot to show you who you're supposed to be looking at, to direct your attention, right? This is the cabinet from last year. And the people in this, here, you could show this now. The people who are here in the white, they're no longer a part of the cabinet. Isn't that something? So what you got here is over here, you got Nikki Haley. She's not there anymore. Here you have EPA Director Scott Pruitt. Run out on a rail for, being disgusting, for corruption. Here you got the Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke, corruption. here you have Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Russian meetings not disclosed, recused, now fired. Here you have Secretary of Defense James Mattis resigned after Donald Trump did not consult anybody from the military and said we're pulling out of Syria. He's and the whole NATO contretemps. So Mattis is gone. And here you have Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the ex-ExxonMobil CEO, no longer there. Over here, you have the former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, who was brought in to replace a guy who beat his wives, multiple, and now he's resigned because he can't control the president. I can't do it. And over here are Veterans Affairs. You got the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin, and we don't have anybody there now. I mean, look at this. This is so unbelievable. This is the turnover in this man's cabinet. How sick is that? So none of these people will be there tonight. And I'm thinking, if they don't have to be there, why do I have to watch? Because we have to see if he declares a national emergency or not. Other than that, I mean, he's going to say this is a choice for greatness, meaning we choose him. This is a choice for unity, meaning we agree with him. Unity. Agree with me. Agree with everything. And he's going to be going into Nancy Pelosi's house, who, by the way, every time you see her, you should run the Jaws soundtrack. It would be so much more fun that way. I mean, she would just, if she could. And I just want to warn you, last year, do you remember how long that speech was before we actually go through what he said? And none of it came true. But last year, it was 80 minutes. That is the longest workday that Donald Trump has ever put in. 80 minutes all in a row. Reading from a teleprompter. So, we'll be making the popcorn. We'll be in for the long haul. And then after that, Stacey Abrams is going to do the televised response for the Democrats, which is pretty historical because we've never had a response from, the opposite party who wasn't an elected official. And as you know, Stacey Abrams gave it a great shot in Georgia, but she's not an elected official. And so this is a very historic choice that the Democrats have made to put Stacey Abrams, who has a fabulous, story to tell, put her on as the person giving the Democrats' response to the 80 minutes of harebrained unity means you all agree with me, and greatness means you choose only me to listen to, and everybody else is fake and an enemy, But after that, if you'll switch over to the YouTubes, then you can see Bernie, the independent, give his response to Donald Trump. So we have a lot of responses, but Stacey's will be broadcast on broadcast television. Whoever carries the speech will carry her response. And Bernie, no. Bernie will be on the YouTubes, I believe on the Twitters, the internets, the modern way. So, and a lot of people are unhappy for one reason or another. Welcome to America. I don't really care. I mean, people are like, is Bernie going to be? I don't know. She should run. He shouldn't run. I don't care. I don't really care right now. Right now, we're going to have a huge, diverse field. We're going to have people not picked by the party. We're going to have people who are exploring their own ability to win an election from the other side, from various walks of life. Of course, Howard Schultz. You know what I think, Howard Schultz? This was painful. I have to play you this. This is just so freaking painful. Howard Schultz was interviewed, and he was asked something about why people don't like billionaires, and he thinks it's the word. He thinks the reason why we don't like them is the B word. The reason why we don't like them is because they can afford to purchase senators, House members, parties, entire parties now, and lobbyists who are in the news today in a big freaking way, who can pay and bundle thousands, if not millions of dollars in order to gain access to people like the President of the United States, which apparently happened with his inaugural. And now there's subpoenas out, as you may know, subpoenaing documents from the inaugural to see whether or not these donors were asked to pay the vendors straight up. For what? For an inaugural that featured the Michael Flatley dancers without Michael Flatley. I mean, that was the worst. So where did all this money go? And now it's all because when they raided Michael Cohen's office, yes, it all goes back to that. When they raided Michael Cohen's office, they got all these documents and all these recorded phone calls. And, you know, Michael Cohen had this really nasty little habit of recording his phone calls. And there was a phone call between Melania's decorator, who became a $25 million event planner for like 72 hours of work or 72 minutes of work or 72 days of work. I mean, just like no work at all. And she was calling Michael Cohen to complain about how the money was being spent. And that call actually started an investigation. And now they want all of the documents. They want all the finances. They want all the records. Good for them. Good for them. But that's why we hate billionaires. Howard! He says it's because they're called billionaires and they should just be called, I don't know, something like wealth accumulators or people of wealth, I think he said. We should just refer to them as people of wealth.
The author of Winner Takes All sent in a question and said, do you agree that billionaires have too much power in American public life? And it gets at the issue that AOC has been talking about. It gets at the issue that Elizabeth Warren's been talking about. It gets at...
Yeah, the moniker billionaire now has become the catchphrase.
The catchphrase.
I would rephrase that, and I would say that people of means have been able to leverage their wealth and their interest in ways that are unfair. And I think that speaks to the inequality. But it also directly speaks to the special interests that are paid for by people of wealth and corporations who are looking for influence. And they have such unbelievable influence on the politicians who are steeped in the ideology of both parties. And once again, I go back to this. If I should run for president, no. I am not in bed with any party. I am not in bed with any special interest. All I'm trying to do is one thing, walk in the shoes of the American people.
Yeah, well, forget about it because your shoes are, $600. It's not going to happen. Don't call me a billionaire. Call me call me a person of means or a person of wealth. And yes, people who have, multiple millions of disposable income are interested in things and such. And so it becomes, a hobby? It becomes a hobby. Lobbying, our government becomes a lobby, getting rules favorable to you and zoning laws favorable to you and tax breaks favorable to you and, health care for all that, it's just... Now, he pointed out the problem correctly. But the idea that he's an everyman, I'm not buying. You buying? I'm not buying.
All things Randy at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
We don't know what the president's going to say, but Sean Hannity last night was saying he's urging him to declare a state of emergency. Should he?
Well, he can declare a state of emergency, but the declaration itself does not give him the power to take private property. And according to Congressman Will Hurd, Republican of Texas, through whose district most of the wall would go, most of the property the federal government doesn't own, so they have to condemn it and pay for it.
That's not
He can't
true.
do that without congressional authorization. He can't spend money without congressional authorization. The emergency declaration, and he has to make the case for it tonight, otherwise the courts will second-guess him. The emergency declaration allows him to mobilize assets, but it doesn't allow him to take or occupy property, and it doesn't allow him to spend money that Congress hasn't authorized. Think about it. If the president, frustrated by Congress, could declare a national emergency and go around Congress, we would have seen this before. Barack Obama would have declared a national emergency in health care and started spending money on insurance policies to keep people healthy. And obviously he didn't because he couldn't.
It sounds as if what the
what the White House is going to do is they're looking at, because they're going to say it's a national emergency, they're looking at some money that the Pentagon already has been approved and granted by Congress, and they're going to reprogram some of the money that has not been designated. And apparently, according to the Washington Post, 10 U.S. Code 2808, the president could do that, and apparently they got $10 billion in there that he could use, and $13 billion that has rolled over through the years.
Well, it depends on what that money was originally marked for. Question, can he take money from column A and put it in column B when column A was authorized by Congress and column B wasn't? Answer, no. There has to be a connection between the two.
Well, Judge, I was reading that apparently in the past, the Pentagon has done that.
Sometimes the Congress has looked the other way when presidents have done this. That doesn't make it lawful, but it makes it easier for the political forces to accept it. I don't think he's going to declare a national emergency tonight. I think he's going to, just listening to John Roberts and our colleagues at the White House, I think he's going to make the case for a national emergency because he has to sell this to the American public. But he can't change the law, and he can't avoid the Constitution.
All right, so that's Judge Andrew Napolitano over there in the Fox and Friends saying that he's not going to declare a national emergency tonight. I don't know. He doesn't. He's just going to lay out the case. Well, if he shut down the government for 35 freaking days, I think he laid out the case, and I think the case has been rejected by 3/4 of the American people. In fact, 66% of us say we don't want a stinking stupid wall. Okay, we don't want it. So the people on the TV, they say he might, Sean Hannity's like he should. My opinion has always been this: he's too freaking lazy to declare a national emergency. That would require some work on his part. It would require some thought on his part. It would require 36 days of fighting with his own Congress. What do I mean by that? Well, if he declares a national emergency, we still have a Congress. And while he's looking to defang them, while he's looking to steal their powers of the purse by declaring a national emergency, that is the goal here, is to say, well, I don't have to go through Congress if I want to spend money, even though, yes, you do. If I declare a national emergency, I can take the money from the Defense Department or the Pentagon. I could take money and I could build my stupid wall. Well, Congress will have something to say about that as well. And in fact, Congress could vote to end the national emergency as soon as he declares it. And last night, it became sort of obvious to me that the House belongs to the Democrats and that they are not going to sit back, relax, and enjoy the shutdown. They are not, it won't be a shutdown, the national emergency declaration. They are not going to just do nothing. It seems to me that they will take an immediate vote to undeclare a national emergency, and then guess what happens? Guess, everybody, just guess. Right, it goes to the Senate. And the Senate is in Republican hands, but they would be forced to vote. Except that nothing happens very quickly. So we would have about 36 days of limbo. And that's what we were talking about yesterday. The damage that could be done in a month. We would have 36 days between the minute that the House passed an undeclaration, if you will, of his emergency declaration, before the Senate had to vote. They could just drag it out for 36 days. So the GOP is starting to panic now because they realize even though they could take the whole 36 days after the House definitely will vote to undo any declaration of national emergency. They will say there is no crisis. We have no evidence of a crisis. They will show all the evidence to the contrary. And that will include Trump playing golf this weekend. That will include the fact that he's threatened this before. And if it was an emergency, he couldn't say he was keeping it in his back pocket now, could he? Which is what he said. He couldn't say it was his plan B. An emergency is never a plan B. It either is or it isn't. And they couldn't, they would be able to make a case that there was no national emergency. And that case also would go through the court system, who would probably decide that you don't have a national emergency if it's plan B to react to it, right?
That glaring absence that you talked about earlier, the fact that none of the intel chiefs brought up a threat at the southern border as being one of the most pressing threats facing the country, that could be Exhibit A in a challenge to any kind of a declaration of a national emergency. The fact that none of our intelligence agencies think it's an emergency, the fact that Congress on both parties don't think this is an emergency, I think if anything is going to undermine that legal case that the president may try to make, that hearing yesterday could be a central exhibit.
Right. So the courts will, of course, he'll get sued immediately, and it will happen in the courts. But also the House of Representatives could vote to undeclare his declared emergency. And the GOP in the Senate is panicking because they now know that that is what will happen. So let's play a couple of the Republican senators, all right? Here is Senator John Kennedy, Louisiana over here.
On the issue of immigration and border security, it's very clear how you feel about the president if he does declare a national emergency. You've said it's not your preference. But what I think is interesting, Senator, is there has been a growing chorus of Republican senators in the last 24 hours seeming to beg the president in public not to declare a national emergency to get wall funding. Senate Majority Whip John Thune of South Dakota, quote, "I hope they don't go down that path." Senator John Cornyn, "a dangerous step," quote, "a serious constitutional question." Senate Homeland Security Chairman Ron Johnson said it would erode constitutionality. And Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine calls it of dubious constitutionality. You are an attorney. A, do you believe it is of dubious constitutionality? And B, do you share their concerns?
Couple of points, Poppy. Number one, it's not my preferred choice. Number two, White House counsel's office has some pretty smart lawyers. My guess is they've researched it. I think the president probably does have the authority. It'll be litigated. Number three, I know a lot of it's not my preferred choice, but I don't think the world's going to spin off its axis if the president does it. Now, some of my colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle, particularly Republicans, are all a titter about the fact that he might do it. But I've learned in this place, talk's cheap. Let's see how they vote.
So he knows a vote is coming, too. He knows it. He just telegraphed that, except that if you didn't understand that Nancy Pelosi could terminate the emergency immediately by taking a vote to terminate it, that it would then go to the Senate. And all we need, it's a majority vote. It wouldn't be a 60. It's a majority vote only. And, of course, Poppy Harlow there, rattled off at least 5 names of senators of the Republican variety who would probably divide from Mitch McConnell and vote against the declaration of a national emergency. And all we need is to peel off 4. And so far we know that Roy Blunt, Cornyn, John Thune, Susan Collins, you only need those 4. We don't even know, where Lisa Murkowski, I doubt, would vote. So, they could undo what he does. I just want you to have some sort of idea of what would be next if he did do this tonight. Of course, my money is on the answer. No, he won't, because he's too freaking lazy. He's just too lazy. And the thing to watch is going to be Nancy Pelosi's face when he talks about immigration and human wall and all these things, okay? And then, of course, a dual track will start, and that will be in the courts. So you'll have 2 branches of government being involved in ending his national emergency. So, I hope to God that democracy can survive this, man. And these are the Democratic tools that would kick in if he did tonight declare a national emergency. Now, I will tell you, he did reposition troops. This is sick. But he moved about 4,000 troops to the border yesterday. So I don't know if he's serious about his freaking human wall. It's like a massive game of Twister on the border. I don't know what the hell his deal is, but he did do that. He did move all these, troops down to the border. And, we still had 2,000 left over from the last time he did it. So I'm not really sure, but I know that there will be a lot of pushback. This is Representative Chris Stewart from Utah.
If we declare a national emergency to build a few hundred miles of fence, my fear is, what is the next Democrat president going to do when he or she thinks that climate change is a national emergency?
What?
And therefore we're going to waive all sorts of will of Congress or the will of the people. Or if they say income inequality is a national emergency. I think it opens up a Pandora's box that I sincerely hope we don't open. I think we will regret it if we do. And I think both sides will regret it if we do. I hope it doesn't come to that, and I don't think it will.
You don't think it will? I don't know why you keep sending me these milquetoast people, but there's a milquetoasty guy if ever there was milk toast. I mean, if you ever wanted to know what milk toast smelled like, looked like, sounded, it is him from Utah. But yeah, they're saying, oh, well, if we allow Trump to do it, then a Democratic president could do it over what is an emergency. Climate change. Look, we have all these disasters that last year he stood at the podium and said, we're with you. We'll never turn our backs on you. And he was talking about back last year. He was talking about Harvey. He was talking about Maria. He was talking about hurricanes in the Panhandle. He was talking about all this damage and all this destruction last year. And now he's talking about redirecting that money from disaster relief this year into his stupid border wall. Let's look at last year. Let's look at some of the things he promised, okay? This was his State of the Union last year. It was a long State of the Union. I printed it out, okay? It was like, it's in the, you know, my piles, right? People tell me that you don't like my piles. I refuse to believe that you don't like my piles. I'm hearing all kinds of stuff right now. Anyway, he talked about the immigration overhaul last year. This is what he said. He said, for over 30 years, Washington has tried and failed to solve this problem. This Congress can be the one that finally makes it happen. So here's what happened after last year's State of the Union in 2018. The Senate took up 4 immigration bills right after the 2018 State of the Union address in January. All 4 of them failed. The one that Trump wanted, with all the money in it, had DACA protection. It had a path to citizenship. And the Republican senators hated that idea. What Trump wanted in exchange for these lives was one single payment of $25 billion instead of doling it out in over 10 years. And that's what the bipartisan bill proposed. It gave him, you know, the Democrats' plan gave him $25 billion to build this stupid wall, doled out over 10 years in exchange for a path to citizenship for DACA. Trump's bill was a path for citizenship for the DACA recipients, but he wanted the $25 billion all at once. He also wanted in his bill to end the ability for people to sponsor their parents to come here, like, oh, I don't know, who did that? The pressure of a name, Melania. Like that, for citizenship. And he wants to end the visa lottery, which is, you know, for the best and the brightest to come here and work for places like the Research and Development Foxconn factory, right? That was his. The compromise bill offered a path to citizenship for the DACA kids, and $25 billion for a border security trust fund to be created, doled out over 10 years. Okay, those 2 failed. Both of those failed. Then months later, the Republican House, they had a very far-ranging immigration bill, but more than half of the Republicans opposed that House measure. And that was embarrassing for Donald Trump because he was being rebuffed by his own House members in his own party. And now that the Democrats are in control, he shuts down the government. So that's where we're at on immigration. And I just want you to know that before Trump, we had the 2013 Gang of 8 bill. That was a bipartisan bill in the Senate. House wouldn't even take it up. They wouldn't even debate it. They wouldn't even look at it. They wouldn't even, nothing. So this faux concern about immigration is faux. All right. Then, you know, they say tonight he's going to call for unity and changing the tone and da-da-da-da-da. Last year he said, tonight I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people we were elected to serve. Then we had our government shut down for 35 days because there's no unity. And of course, right after his State of the Union in 2018, he started tweeting really disgusting things about Democrats. So much for his pledge of unity. That was fake. That was false. He'll do it again tonight. I'm pretty damn sure. But just know what he means by it. We have to define, like when you actually draft a contract, you have to define your terms. Like, what does this term mean? Unity in his definite, if you had to define it when it comes out of his pie hole, it means we all agree with me. That's unity to him. So I expect that he's going to say a lot of the same things. We'll go over, some more of the stuff he said last year, because I have a funny feeling you're going to hear a lot of it again this year. And I just want you to know what happened to it last year. Just as a little preview, remember last year he talked about $1 trillion in infrastructure spending and how easy infrastructure was, and that's why he saved it for a second year, because it was so easy. Remember that? And then remember last year he said we're going to have insurance for everybody, and it was going to be cheaper and better, and everyone was going to have it. Yeah, just a preview.
Connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. Now you expect to declare a national...
I don't want to say, but you'll hear the State of the Union, and then you'll see what happens right after the State of the Union, okay?
All right. We're going to hear the State of the Union, and we're going to see what happens right after the State of the Union. So something tells me he's not going to do anything in this speech, and that he might do something, after he gets back to his bedroom and turns on Fox News and sees whether or not Sean Hannity liked the speech or not, and whether or not Sean Hannity is depressed that he didn't declare a national emergency during the State of the Union. And so therefore he'll, tweet out, I'm declaring, he'll do it by tweet. This is going to be really a night for the age. You will rue the day that this man declares a national emergency if and when he does it. But let's go over all the crap he said last year so that you will listen to this year with the proper amount of, let's say, respect for his words, okay? Last year, he said we're going to have health insurance for everybody. Okay? You hear that silence? That's because that never happened. It never happened. And instead, he decided that he would strip the coverage from tens of millions of people with pre-existing conditions. He decided that he would start allowing for these bare bones policies that cover nothing to be sold again. He's also called for work requirements for people who get Medicaid, which affects the people who are sick, it affects the disabled. It also, affects students from getting health insurance. He cut tribal health care funding by hundreds of millions of dollars. He said he was going to lower drug prices last year. So let me tell you what happened on drug prices. Some drug prices went down a whole 0.6%. But for every drug that lost a 1/10 of a percentage point in the cost, 96 drugs the cost increased for. For every drug they lowered a price on, the pharmaceutical companies raised the price on 96 others. For every 1 to 96, that is the ratio. Drug manufacturers are continuing to raise prices. In fact, tonight you're going to have people as guests of Congress members and senators who have insulin-dependent children, who are unable to purchase insulin. You saw the stories about during the shutdown. You saw people trying to make a decision between their chemotherapy and their mortgage. You saw people trying to decide how to pay for their insulin during the shutdown because insulin. You know how old a drug insulin is? I mean, this is just bizarro world, okay? And the number of uninsured Americans increased by about 8 million. Okay, then he said the presidency was going to cost him a fortune. He said tax reforms would cost him a fortune. Who made more money than people with pass-through corporations? No one. And how does Donald Trump pay himself? Through pass-throughs. And pass-throughs now have this deduction loophole that expands the benefits for the Trump organization and Kushner companies, to name a few, all the real estate people. There's a carve-out for them. I don't get it. You don't get it. Unless you're in real estate and you have a real estate company, then you get it. He said, every policy decision we make must pass through a simple test. Does it create more jobs and better wages? Okay, let's look at the wage increases in this country. Looks like wages are virtually stagnant. You know, last year wages went down by like 3%. This year wages went up by 3%. So it's a wash on wages. That's the little dirty secret in that jobs report we got on Friday. And the U6 number, which is the real number of people who are working at part-time jobs but would like a full-time job, or people who have stopped looking for a job because they don't think they'll ever find a job. The actual unemployment number, the U6 number, is not 4% or 3.9. It's 8.1%. So the U6 number, which includes household surveys of people who said that they are working, but they're working in part-time jobs, and they were working in full-time jobs, but they had to take a part-time job to make ends meet. The U6 number is 8.1%. Wages this year increased by $2.41, okay? But corporate profits increased by 17%. And this moron passed these overtime rules. It was an Obama-era rule that updated overtime rules, and he reversed it. And so it resulted in $1.2 billion in lost wages each and every year for people who expected to get paid time and a half for their overtime. He's also left the minimum wage at $7.25, despite the fact that the purchasing power has sharply diminished over 10 years, and that's the last time it was raised. Then he said, you know, Wall Street has caused tremendous problems for us. We're going to tax Wall Street. Well, you better tell that to Mick Mulvaney, who, as acting director, Obama appointed Richard Cordray to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And as soon as Trump became Trump, he appointed Mick Mulvaney to that same Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And Mick Mulvaney had called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau a sick, sad joke. And so he stripped all the powers from the Fair Lending Office, and enforcement of consumer protections have decreased by 75% under Mick Mulvaney. Now, he said he would break up big banks, but of course, he's done nothing at all on that front. And the tax bill that he passed, the scam, gave $26 billion in a windfall to the banking sector. Now, you know how he talks about you're not going to see companies leaving anymore, and, you know, just look at what's happening, and you'll see GM, and you'll see this, and they're not going to be leaving anymore? Yeah, well, General Motors in November announced plans to close 5 plants in the United States and Canada. They cut their workforce by 15%, or 14,700 jobs. This is after the layoffs at Carrier and Ford, which Ford restructured, and he said, we're going to get the greatest deal for workers. So, one thing he did say that happened, he said, quote, people who are terminally ill should not have to go from country to country to seek a cure. I don't know who these terminally ill rich people he knows are, but terminally ill people here that are, living on my kind of salary, we can't go country to country. But he said, I want to give them a chance right here at home. It's time for the Congress to give these wonderful Americans a right to try. All right. Congress did pass the right to try legislation. Trump signed it in May, and it's there. But the patients groups that were lobbying against it said it gives false hope and ineffective drugs to desperate patients, and they were against it, but it did get passed. Last year, he also said, one of my greatest priorities is to reduce the price of prescription drugs. In many other countries, these drugs cost far less than what we pay in the United States. This is why I have directed my administration to make fixing the injustice of high drug prices one of our top priorities. Prices will come down. I got the numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they reported that for a small basket of brand name and generic drugs, that the cost fell for a small basket of those drugs by 0.6%. And still, they reported, and the Associated Press, actually printed it, and so it was in newspapers around this country, that during the first 7 months of 2018, there were 96 price increases for every price cut. So he's done nothing on that. And then his big thing with the trade deals. Okay, he said, we will work to fix bad trade deals and negotiate new ones. That was last year's promise. So they negotiated a fake North American trade agreement, a fake NAFTA. He said it would be a big win for automakers, and then GM announced that they were closing 5 plants in the U.S. and Canada, right? And, of course, his new NAFTA, UMSCA, or whatever the hell it's called, it hasn't been voted on by Congress. It hasn't even been taken up by the Senate, right? So nothing's happened there. And let's see, the trade thing with China. Both nations have increased the tariffs that importers pay. Importers pay it. So companies have to absorb the new costs and pass it on to us through their higher prices. Negotiations continue. The United States is set to raise tariffs on an additional $200 billion worth of Chinese imports in March. And, of course, the Chinese retaliated by not buying any soybeans at all in November. On infrastructure last year, he said, quote, tonight, I am calling on the Congress to produce a bill that generates $1.5 trillion for new infrastructure investment that we need. No proposal. He doesn't have one. Congress doesn't have one. The Senate doesn't have one. And the sticking point is how to pay for it. And nobody, wants to discuss that. So that will never happen. Now, on criminal justice, he did do something for federal only. For federal only. He allowed for rehabilitation programs in prison so you could learn to sew and be slave labor. I don't know. And also some judicial discretion in sentencing. And that was a compromise bill that the Democrats and the Republicans worked out. Cory Booker, the First Step program. And so all that does is give judges more discretion when sentencing some drug offenders. And it provides for prisoner rehabilitation programs in federal prisons only. Then he talked about Guantanamo, and he said last year, quote, I am asking Congress to ensure that the fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda, we continue to have all necessary power to detain terrorists wherever we chase them down, wherever we find them. And in many cases for them, it will be now Guantanamo Bay. No new prisoners have been added to Guantanamo Bay under Donald Trump in any period in time, let alone last year, the year before either. But they did release one prisoner from Guantanamo. He was a Saudi terrorist. And he was sent back to Saudi in a plea agreement that he reached with U.S. prosecutors. There are currently 40 people at Gitmo. It remains open. It costs us millions of dollars, and he has sent no ISIS fighters that we've captured, no Al-Qaeda fighters he sent nobody there. So, like I said, he also called for unity. He, last year too, he said these companies won't be leaving anymore. The economy was rigged, blah, blah, blah. They would do something about that. And, of course, what he did was massive tax cuts for the wealthy. And he, on trade, used thousands of American farmers as pawns to help corporations. And, he rigged the economy to benefit the absolute wealthiest people on the planet, including creating even more pass-through loopholes for real estate. I wonder why he was so concerned about that particular industry. So, I mean, I don't even know if you're going to watch it. You have to tell me. Are you planning? It's 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific. So Mountain Time, 7 o'clock, right? But it just seems to me that he's already said in that little teeny tiny clip, not that you could believe anything he says, but sometimes he talks so much. Stop talking already. Shut the F up, Donnie. Sometimes he talks so much that a little morsel of, what's coming is, actually excreted from the pie hole. And he did say, just watch, watch the State of the Union. I think you'll find it very interesting. And then watch what happens right after. That's what he said. And that is just so super, super creepy.
You're saying now you expect to declare a national...
I don't want to say, but you'll hear the State of the Union, and then you'll see what happens right after the State of the Union, okay?
Okay. So maybe when Stacey Abrams is actually on the TV, he will have tweeted something about a national emergency. And I got to tell you, the Republicans in the Senate especially are just freaked out. The House Republicans aren't, because we have the majority there. And Nancy Pelosi will introduce a bill to end any national emergency that he declares, like, immediately. I mean, I think it'll happen in real time. But then it has to go to the Senate, and the Senate's got, their rules about when they receive the bills from the House. And it could be 36 days of absolute torture after the 35 days of the shutdown. Oh, my God.
Mary had a little lamb.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Breaking overnight, federal prosecutors have issued a subpoena seeking documents from President Trump's inaugural committee. The U.S. Attorney's Office in New York is investigating allegations that the committee misspent some of the tens of millions it raised from donations, and that some donors gave money in exchange for access to influence policy in the Trump administration. That subpoena seeks documents regarding donations made by or on behalf of foreign nationals. That's a quote. A spokeswoman says the committee intends to cooperate with that inquiry.
Oh, boy. So there is not one part of the Trump name brand stuff, not the foundation, not the inaugural, not the organization, and not the campaign, that isn't under investigation. This investigation is being handled by the feds in New York. This is SDNY. This is the New York feds, not Mueller. And that's where Michael Cohen was. And I'm telling you right now, it's the reason for this is because Michael Cohen, when his office was raided, and Rick Gates, who is cooperating, Michael Cohen was making phone calls, because he was so greedy that he was trying to trade on his closeness to Trump and the inaugural committee. And he was telling people, oh, you need to give $1 million if you want access to Trump. And all this stuff was discoverable because Michael Cohen kept, phone calls. Michael Cohen kept documents. Michael Cohen kept emails. All this stuff was discoverable by the Southern District of New York, the feds, and they found some stuff that they want to investigate further. So Rick Gates, if you're wondering, like, who was the inaugural committee, it was this guy Tom Barrack, who's not named in the subpoena as best as I can tell. Tom Barrack was in charge of it. Mike Pence was in charge of it. Also, Rick Gates was in charge of it, and Michael Cohen. So 2 of the 4 people, Barrack and Pence, are not indicted and haven't pled guilty to crimes. But the 2 others who were in charge of the inaugural committee, Gates and Cohen, are cooperating with Mueller. And I got a funny feeling that Mueller found all this and said, this is not something that we were charged to investigate. However, there are crimes here, and they handed it off to SDNY, to the feds in New York.
I mean, wow. Can we just pull up on the screen what prosecutors are looking at here in terms of potential crimes? Conspiracy against the United States, false statements, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, disclosure violations, and even potential contributions by foreign nations. Wow. They have reason to believe one or all of these crimes may have been committed here. What's your read?
Well, and they have reason to believe that proof of that crime or documents that support evidence of those crimes exist with the inaugural committee. It's one of those things you look at and say, well, if the entire discussion about who would have contributed, who would get their just dessert by being allowed to go to the committee events and the inaugural events in general, who may have been able to go through a loophole or pass on through a straw donor, which is what they're also looking for. Somebody who they say, look, I am not allowed to give campaign contributions. Maybe I'm a foreign national or other reason. I'm going to give them to you. Could you please do me a solid and do it for me? They're looking for all evidence of that. And remember, the inaugural committee raised an exorbitant amount of money compared to the relatively modest amount of events they had. So that high amount of money that they had compared to the modest events, where did the money go? Where did it come from? And who was given the ability to appear and rub elbows with the President of the United States? It also tells me, Poppy, that, again, a second case has been farmed to the SDNY. Cohen and campaign contributions, Mueller didn't want any part of it. Now you've got this, same thing. This is on autopilot, even if the special counsel probe ends.
So who at SDNY is looking into this? It is it's being led by the Public Corruption Unit of the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office, and it grew out of Michael Cohen's business dealings, according to people that have seen the document, the subpoena. Now, you know, Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to 8 different charges that were brought by the New York prosecutors. He has been sentenced to 3 years in jail. He is scheduled to do closed-door testimony with the Senate Intelligence Committee and with the House Intelligence Committee. We're hoping that before he goes to jail in March, he could do a public sort of an appearance with the House Oversight Committee, but we don't know. They're still negotiating that because Michael Cohen, you know, heard Donald Trump threatening his father-in-law and heard Donald Trump threatening his wife and daughter, and told Donnie Deutsch, of all people, on MSNBC that he was terrified to testify in public because Donald Trump was, intimidating him as a witness. So that's still being negotiated. Here's what the subpoena doesn't mention, according to people who have seen it. It doesn't mention Tom Barrack Jr. Now, Tom Barrack, also real estate developer, another real estate developer, longtime friend of Donald Trump. He led the inaugural committee. Nobody thinks he's under investigation. What the subpoena is asking for is all documents related to the donors and the vendors and any filings with the Federal Election Committee, because that is where the inaugural would have to disclose its donations. It wants records of any benefits that anybody received in exchange for their pay to play, right? They want to know, did you get tickets to something? Did you get a photo op? Did you go to a reception? Right? The only person that is named in this subpoena relates to communications with a man named Imad Zubiri. Now, he is a private equity guy, a venture capitalist in L.A. And it's very, very strange because Mr. Zubiri, he's an American. He was born here in the United States. He's, part Pakistani, part Indian. He was a Democratic bundler, meaning that, you could only give $2,700 as an individual to a campaign. And he worked for Obama in 2008 and 12. And this is before he became a lobbyist or registered as a foreign agent, a foreign consultant, okay, and began lobbying for, here in the United States, for Sri Lanka, believe it or not, because Sri Lanka had a massive corruption problem. In fact, the guy who stole all this money, like $10 billion as the president of Sri Lanka, is no longer there. Anyway, it's a complicated story, this Zubiri guy, but he's the only person named in this thing. He was a Democratic bundler. He would bundle the individual $2,700 max donations. This is, of course, after Citizens United, all bets were off, but he would bundle individual donors into big, bundles and then make the contribution to the Obama campaign or Organizing for America. And then he also was a bundler for Hillary Clinton. And now all of a sudden he's in this subpoena as somebody who contributed $900,000 to the Trump campaign. And Michael Cohen told him that he needed to give an additional $1 million in order to have access to the Trump administration. Now, the comment from his camp is Emad knows nothing about a subpoena other than what's being written tonight. A spokesman for Mr. Zubiri said, it's well known that after supporting President Obama and later Hillary Clinton, Emad gave generously and directly to the Trump Inaugural Committee. But many others gave substantially more. If in fact he is named in the subpoena, never mind somehow alone, he is bewildered as to why. This is a very strange story. But that's the only person that's named in the subpoena. And this guy was he is a very well-connected guy who totally bundles, he's a fundraiser. They call them bundlers. They go out and they get individual contributions and then they, make big donations. Now, when he worked for Obama, he was not a registered lobbyist at all. He was a private equity fund manager and a venture capitalist and an elite political fundraiser. He was a bundler for, I think he gave $1,000 to Barack Obama way back in 2007. He got in early on the Obama campaign, and I think he gave him $1,000. All of a sudden, this guy is bundling money, and he's giving $500,000 or more in the re-election campaign for Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton's campaign, he was listed as a Clinton Hillblazer, bundling $100,000 for her presidential campaign in its first months. And then in 2014, he becomes a lobbyist. And he starts lobbying for the Sri Lankan government, who was under fire for being officially corrupt. And Sri Lanka paid him $4.5 million in 2014 directly, and then another $2 million to a company he co-owns for consulting services that included the job of influencing the U.S. government on our foreign policy regarding Sri Lanka. He did not disclose the $6.5 million he got in 2014 as required under federal law, and the lobbying and public relations firms that were hired through his company to influence us, the U.S. government, on Sri Lanka's behalf, were all subpoenaed by the Department of Justice in 2015. This is, I went and pulled an old article on him because his name was sort of semi-familiar because I had read about him, but I couldn't place him, you know what I mean? So there was another DOJ investigation into him because our Department of Justice was looking for the public assets that were stolen from Sri Lanka. Now, none of the firms were a target of the investigation. They were just looking to find where the money went. And it was a lot of money. A lot of money that was stolen from Sri Lanka. I mean, this just reeks of, like the Prevezon fraud, you know what I mean? Where money is stolen from the government treasury by an individual and it's laundered. I mean, it's very weird. I don't know who he is, but see, this is the problem with money in politics, and this is what you get. And this is, the $1,000 that he gave was pre-Citizens United. Post-Citizens United, it turns into $500,000 of bundling. And then by 2014, this guy is getting in $6.5 million from a foreign government. I mean, and then all of a sudden he's giving $900,000 to the Trump Inaugural Committee to get access to Trump. And Michael Cohen's on the phone with him telling him you got to give an additional $1 million if you want to, meet privately with Donald. It's all for sale. I mean, the corruption is like, it's like a foreign country. It's like a banana republic.
Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Oh, look, everybody. Somebody's on a book tour. Chris Christie was everywhere. You know what really blew my mind last night about Chris Christie? Chris Christie went on MSNBC last night. Didn't MSNBC hunt him on Bridgegate like a little zooid Zia? Oh my God, they were hunting him on Bridgegate, which he got away with. But I mean, honestly, this man is shame. He goes on MSNBC last night, he sat down, had this really friendly interview. And then this, he's on State of the Union, and he's like, why? Because he's got a book to sell. Unbelievable. But he was asked about this inaugural committee subpoena, okay? And here's what he said.
Well, I've always thought that the Southern District of New York investigation was much more concerning than the Mueller investigation for a simple reason. They have tour guides and no restrictions. So their tour guides are Michael Cohen, who was a longtime lawyer for the president, and Rick Gates, who is particularly important to the subpoena that was issued yesterday because Rick Gates was the executive director of the inaugural committee.
Oh.
And so, unlike Bob Mueller, who has restrictions that were placed upon him by the Deputy Attorney General when he was appointed, that his inquiry is on Russia, interference with the election, and potential Russian collusion. And you saw that Mueller reacted to those restrictions by sending the Michael Cohen matter that he discovered to the Southern District of New York. Southern District of New York has no restrictions. In fact, when I was U.S. attorney, and other U.S. attorneys will tell you, they call them the sovereign district of New York. They think their jurisdiction is everywhere around the world. There will be no restrictions on SDNY. Yesterday there were some very specific things in that subpoena. They laid out the specific potential criminal statutes that are implicated. Very specifically, you list them: foreign money, money laundering. They listed conspiracy. They listed false statements. They went through a whole menu of potential statutes that they believe may be implicated. And they basically asked for everything from the inaugural committee. When you look at the subpoena, it's everything they have. So I don't think they're someplace now where they're deep into this investigation. But it's obvious to me from some of the specifics in there that they have a tour guide, and my guess would be that tour guide is Rick Gates because he's cooperating with the government. And you don't just cooperate with Mueller, you cooperate with the Justice Department, and you can get sent anywhere they want if you want to get full cooperation credit.
Right. And you remember Michael Cohen didn't get full cooperation credit because he didn't want to talk about previous crimes that he might have been involved in. So that's why Michael Cohen's going to lockup for 3 years. Of course, he'll probably go to Otisville in New York. He'll get kosher meals there. I'm not kidding. Otisville is where every criminal of, the Jewish faith get pretty much requests. Everybody wants to go there because it's kosher. But anyway, that's why he got 3 years in lockup, because he's not fully cooperating. However, Rick Gates, this is really interesting. Rick, it looks like SDNY, it looks like the raids of Cohen's office produced so much stuff. Just so much stuff. And remember, they raided his house, they raided his office, they raided his hotel room. The FBI did, right? And they got recorded conversations between Michael Cohen and this woman named Stephanie Watson Wolkoff. Now, she was a designer for Melania. And then all of a sudden, she became an event planner. And $40 million, they raised $107 million, this inaugural committee did, which is really bizarre. Barack Obama, I think, for his first election, raised $53 million, which is, less than half. And then I think for his re-election, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 40, 43, something like that, 45 maybe. This Trump inaugural raised $107 million, and they could only account for spending about 60. So $40 million, and you might remember this. This might be like, ticking off some little memory that you have. 40 million of it is unaccounted for and always has been. And like I said, when you saw that inaugural, it was, what do you have? He had Frank Sinatra, My Way on tape. if he dances, with the Justice Department, the way he danced on that, particular dance floor, he's dead. That was like painful to watch. But he danced to My Way, and it was recorded. And who did we have as entertainment? Again, Michael Flatley and without Michael Flatley, we had the Michael Flatley dancers, and Michael Flatley refused to appear. That was weird. Remember that? And then you had like Lee Greenwood singing his old, song that Trump uses at all his rallies, to start his rallies. Proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. I can own an AK-47 and a shotgun and an Uzi. You know that song, right? So what did he spend all this money on? I mean, it was just terrible. So now the Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, the Trump Inaugural Committee, the Trump Campaign, everything Trump owns is literally being investigated for conspiracy to defraud the United States, for money laundering, for stealing, literally taking the money and using it for, purposes, that were never divulged, taking foreign money, which is prohibited by U.S. law. We have the one campaign finance law. We have like the one that says you can't take foreign money. And of course, it seems like he did. And Rick Gates was in charge of the inaugural committee, and the federal prosecutors have asked Rick Gates about the spending by the inaugural fund, and they wanted the list of donors, and he has met with the prosecutors in Manhattan, and apparently he's singing. He's singing like Barbra Streisand on a clear day. And SDNY is going to be able to see forever into Donald Trump's finances. This is just incredible. Now, I will tell you that Michael Cohen got $10 million for the inaugural committee. This is just crazy. And he's, Michael Cohen wasn't part of anything. Michael Cohen didn't work. Well, it looks like the Manhattan federal prosecutors have asked this Tennessee developer, all developers. You remember when I talked to Craig Unger the other day about the decades-long relationship Trump has had with the Russians? And everyone that he knows and everyone that he was, doing, they're all real estate people, all of them. So there's this guy in Tennessee. His name's Franklin Haney. Manhattan, the feds asked him for documents related to a $1 million donation he made to the inaugural committee in 2016. It appears that Mr. Haney gave Michael Cohen $10 million to have access to Donald Trump at one point, because Michael Cohen was representing himself as somebody with a close relationship to Donald Trump, who could get you in front of Donald Trump, who could get you meetings with Donald Trump, who could get you a phone call with Donald Trump, whatever, in his executive time. This is what he's doing. And he got paid. But it looks like they have publicly identified vendors who and did the accounting for the money that was paid to them, and it only accounts for $61 million of the $103 million that was spent. Now, they raised $107. So where's $4 million and where's $40 million? It's just unbelievable. Now, this is double what his first inaugural cost, and it's more than double, what his second inaugural cost. And it looks like people who gave $1 million or more: Sheldon Adelson, AT&T. Why? Because of the AT&T Time Warner merger. Remember that? Caused all of this contretemps, all of this, right? Boeing, over $1 million. And guess who our acting Secretary of Defense is? Mr. Shanahan is a Boeing executive. Isn't that special? Man has no military experience whatsoever. But it's okay with Trump because he's smarter than the generals, and he knows to pull troops out of here and here and here, and then to put them over there. Yeah, because and CENTCOM, the commander of CENTCOM today, journalists asked him whether or not he was consulted about the troop withdrawal plan for Syria, and he said, no, I wasn't consulted. He said, I'm aware of it now because he has to execute it. But he wasn't aware of it. Nobody consulted it. So it's very weird. So now we have a Boeing executive as acting Secretary of Defense. And the Manhattan Fed's, investigation apparently rose out of the materials that they took in April when they raided his Michael Cohen's house, his office, and his hotel room. And apparently they found a conversation with Melania's decorator, who, was complaining to Michael Cohen about where's all the money? Where's all the money? So this particular subpoena is insane. I mean, the amount of statutes that they, that they name that they believe were violated, meaning they have, proof, evidence that they could prove in court that the inaugural conspired to defraud the United States of America. That is one of the charges in this subpoena. I mean, it blows your mind. It's like Donald Trump, and also, I got to tell you this, there's two other amazing articles today, both of them from BuzzFeed. But, oh my God, this BuzzFeed article. Oh, there's two of them. Oh, this is crazy. Okay, so secret files that BuzzFeed has its hands on show that the Donald Trump effort to build the Trump Tower Moscow was much, much, much more than what Donald Trump has said it is. That they have a cache of internal Trump organization documents that lay bare the secret negotiations that continued long after Michael Cohen says the deal was abandoned. They said that they have all kinds of documents that show a long-running, detail-oriented effort that was directly entwined with the Trump campaign, and that how Trump went from rally to rally, denying any of his dealings with Russia, that these documents coincide with that period in time, and it clearly shows that Michael Cohen and Felix Sater, both of them cooperating now, worked with not just the Trump organization, not as Trump organization, but that they worked with Trump, that they worked with Ivanka, that there were designs, that there were plans, that there were documents, and it was a 100-story building miles from the Kremlin, and that they believed that they needed Putin's support to pull this off. And so they were telling Donald Trump to praise Putin, and at the same time, they were plotting on the other side for Putin to declare his support for Trump. Now, you remember that famous Felix Sater email where Felix Sater writes to Michael Cohen that if Putin says that he's in support of Donald Trump, we own this election. Now, Felix Sater was asked on TV when he did his rounds why he equated Putin's praise for Trump with winning the election, and he's never given a good answer. So I don't know what it is. But anyway, the documents that BuzzFeed says it has is business agreements, architectural renderings, texts, emails, plans for Trump to travel to Russia to meet with Putin, new negotiations, that were ongoing. I mean, and that's not even the big blockbuster one. The big blockbuster one is that, you remember the Trump Tower meeting? Well, it was not just Natalia Veselnitskaya that was there, and it wasn't just a translator that was there. There was a guy named Rinat Akhmetshin that Bill Browder constantly brings up to me whenever I talk to Bill Browder about the Prevezon thing, right? Turns out that Rinat Akhmetshin, he's a lobbyist here in the United States. And a couple of banks, Bank of America and Wells Fargo, has flagged some of his transactions. He got a lot of cash transactions that were made just before the Trump Tower meeting and just after the Trump Tower meeting. And he was at the Trump Tower meeting. And he said he just happened to be there, just like Eric Prince said, he happened to run into Russians in the Seychelles Islands. And now we're finding out that that meeting was set up through a Lebanese guy that's also friends in the Trump circle, George Nadler, and that he set it up with the United Arab Emirates, doing the invite to the Russians, and that they were all planning this meeting in the Seychelles to open up a back channel for Russia to communicate with Donald Trump outside of the eyes and ears of the intelligence community. I mean, they're all connected. These are all old friends. That's the sick part. They're all old friends. Now, Rinat Akhmetshin was a Soviet military officer, and now he's free to lobby here in Washington, D.C. And they're saying he deposited these large, round number amounts of cash in the months before the Trump Tower meeting and just following the meeting, where Natalia Veselnitskaya was there promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. And he was there, and one of the payments he got was from this guy that you might remember we talked to Bill Browder about, this guy named Dennis Katsev. Dennis Katsev is the owner of that company, Prevezon. Now, you know what happened at Prevezon. Prevezon was a company that as soon as Bill Browder paid his taxes, because Bill Browder understood he was under threat in Moscow. He understood. His lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, understood. They were going to come after him. So they started selling off all their holdings, everything they owned. They sold it and they made $1 billion profit in the sell-off. And so they were hit with capital gains taxes in Russia. And Bill Browder paid them. He paid $230 million. And as soon as that money went to the Russian treasury, that money was turned around by Putin and given to Dennis Katsev at Prevezon. Because Dennis Katsev started filing tax documents saying that he is owed a refund on this, on this payment that Hermitage Capital had paid on their capital gains. So Prevezon literally was given the $230 million in tax payments that Bill Browder received. That was called the Russian Treasury fraud. And the fraud, the money that was fraudulently taken from the Russian Treasury paid by Bill Browder was given to Dennis Katsev in this company, Prevezon. He is the actual owner of Prevezon. Well, Natalia Vesel, you had Southern District of New York, Pre-Pahara, you had a big investigation into this money being laundered and being put into Manhattan real estate. Katsev had to launder the ill-gotten goods that was given to him by Putin, from the Treasury, and he decided to do it through New York, Manhattan, specifically luxury real estate. They got caught. And a legal case, federal case ensued. Pre-Pahara was the lead federal prosecutor at SDNY. And then all of a sudden, Pre-Pahara, Donald Trump, Pre-Pahara is fired, and a settlement happens. Well, it looks like Rinat Akhmetshin was at this Trump Tower meeting representing Dennis Katsev, the owner of Prevezon. Natalia Veselnitskaya was at this meeting representing Prevezon. She was the attorney here in the United States who was representing Prevezon. And now all of a sudden, we find out that they were talking about the Magnitsky Act, which happened because Sergei Magnitsky, Bill Browder's attorney, uncovered this fraud, and the Russians killed him. Vladimir Putin literally killed him. See, Magnitsky thought he would go to the Russian government and tell them, Dennis Katsev stole all this money and blah, 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 and here's your money. It belongs to you, it belongs to the Russian people, it belongs to the Russian treasury. And instead, Putin had him jailed and then beat him to death with a rubber hose.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
This is hysterical, okay? Now the Trump inaugural has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This is just...
Are you confident that no one performed any illegal actions on the president's inaugural committee?
Look, I'm reading the same reports you are this morning and gathering that information. What I do know at this point is this has nothing to do with the White House. And for anything specific and further, I'd refer you back to the Trump inaugural committee.
It has nothing to do with the Trump inaugural has nothing to do with the Trump White House. Are you freaking kidding me? Trump's lawyer has nothing to do with Donald Trump. His inaugural committee chair has nothing to do with Donald Trump. Rick Gates has not. Michael Flynn, he was only there a very short time. I mean, this is just, pretty soon he's going to say that, his kids weren't really his kids. They were, raised by Ivana, and he only got to know them after they were, fully formed. And he had nothing. I couldn't believe she said that on the TV this morning. I couldn't believe, they're asking her, they're saying there's a subpoena, a massive freaking subpoena. And the subpoena clearly is saying that the inaugural committee to inaugurate Donald Trump, to be held after he's sworn in as president of the United States of America, is being accused of criminal activity to include money laundering, to include a conspiracy to defraud the United States, to include the lesser charges of campaign finance violations, accepting foreign money, straw donors, Michael Cohen getting millions of dollars to sell access to the Trump White House. And she sits there with a straight face and says it has nothing to do with us. These people have nothing to do with us.
Are you confident that no one performed any illegal actions on the president's inaugural committee?
Look, I'm reading the same reports you are this morning and gathering that information. What I do know at this point is this has nothing to do with the White House. And for anything specific and further, I'd refer you back to the Trump inaugural committee.
The inaugural committee is absolutely separate from the White House. The notion, though, that it has nothing to do with the White House in a broader sense, though, and we talked the day that Roger Stone was arrested as well, it has something to do with the person who sits in the Oval Office, in that President Trump. It was his inauguration.
Hello.
It was his campaign.
Hello.
That there are so many investigations and questions with now.
Right.
His transition, which is investigated, the Trump Organization being investigated at all. He is a common thread to an extent between all these investigations, is he not?
Thank you.
Actually, I think the common thread is a hysteria over the fact that this president became president.
Yeah, nice redirection there, Sarah. Listen, Paul Manafort, who will be sentenced on March 13th, was the president's campaign manager. His partner, Rick Gates, was he was the vice chair of the inaugural. He also pled guilty to charges that he was an unregistered foreign agent. He is cooperating with Mueller. Michael Cohen also received millions of dollars by selling his access to Donald Trump through the inaugural committee. He is cooperating with Bob Mueller, and that just leaves Tom Barrack, the real estate developer, Donald Trump's old friend. The Manafort, Stone, Gates, these guys and Trump go back 40 freaking years. In this article, it says, beyond his work with Katsev, okay, talking about Rina Akhmetshin, who's also a lobbyist, okay? A lobbyist here in the United States. Manafort was a lobbyist, okay? Manafort, Gates, what was it? Manafort, Black was the last name. Manafort, Stone, Black, and Kelly. Okay, that was their lobby shop. Donald Trump was a client, okay? This is going back all these years. Going back all these years. Now you got this Russian guy who was Russian army officer. He's a lobbyist here in the United States. He's representing this Russian oligarch that stole the money from Prevezon. It was given to him by Putin through the Treasury fraud. Natalia Veselnitskaya is the lawyer for Dennis Katzev's company, Prevezon, that was given the money through Putin's stealing of it, from the Treasury to Dennis Katzev, who owns Prevezon. And then they say, beyond his work with Katzev, talking about this other lobbyist, beyond his work with Katzev and Veselnitskaya, investigators discovered that Akhmetshin had received large, mostly unexplained wire transfers from companies in Latvia and Panama and payments from longtime American political insiders, one of whom is a veteran Republican operator with ties to the Trump campaign. That has to be Roger Stone. Manafort, Stone, Gates, Flynn. All these people up to their eyeballs in Russia. So now Senator Richard Burr, North Carolina, who's still the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee because they still have the majority over there, the Republicans do, he actually said to BuzzFeed today, they asked him, what do you think about all this? And he said to BuzzFeed, quote, given that the June 9th meeting in Trump Tower with senior campaign staff was about that, I think we've explored every possibility relative to that topic. I think everybody's been of interest to us, every group, every individual that is tied to that. So you got a Republican over there. I mean, listen, they're starting to see, and the crazy part is that there is an American law firm that they had to work with in order to get to be in an American court, and that U.S. law firm that was hired by Dennis Katzev is Baker Hostetler, and investigators at Wells Fargo saw a payment to Baker Hostetler from Rinat Akhmetian for $97,400 over 5 months. So Baker Hostetler was paying Rinat Akhmetian to represent Previs. I mean, it's just so sick, this whole thing. This is why you got to get the money out. You got to get the money out. This is, this whole thing with Trump, this whole thing with all these shady characters, this whole thing with foreign bundlers, this whole thing with, Russia. And this is all because of Citizens United. This is all because there's, and what's crazy is there's really only one campaign finance law still, and that one is foreign money. And this is the natural conclusion to a corrupt system going full out corrupt with Donald Trump. I mean, when the Republican, Citizens United, David Bossie, his stupid movie, this is what took all the lid off of all this money, this dark money, and not having to disclose donors and not having to say where it's coming. All this. And I remember when Al Gore was like running for president, there was like some Buddhist temple that made a small donation, and all the Republicans, they were going crazy. He took foreign money. He took foreign money from a Buddhist temple. And now it's full on. It's millions and millions and millions of dollars to purchase the president of the United States, to purchase people, to just outright do the deal, just do the transaction. And he was the right guy. He's just the right guy. He has absolutely no moral compass. He has no principles. He has no feeling for the American people. He craps in a gold toilet. He will say anything, anytime to anybody. No one will work for him because the second you go inside, you can see that this man is lazy, that he cheats, that he's devious, that he's only looking to enrich himself and his freaking kids, that he's using his position to make money. He doesn't have a care for the American people. He lies. He says, I mean, when he says, and you see it, you see these people coming over the border, and you see this crime, and you see these drugs, and you see this, and you see that. You don't see any of it. But he tells you, you see that General Motors is building new factories. You see that clean, beautiful coal is coming back. Meanwhile, what you see is no coal jobs. What you see is GM shutting 5 plants, cutting 14,000 jobs. I mean, it's just an amazing. It's an amazing misdirection. It's just he's a magician for really dumb people. But all he is, in the end, is the culmination of 9 years of absolute campaign corruption, finance corruption. Ever since Citizens United, this thing has been open for business to purchase, and to purchase policy, and to purchase weapons, and to purchase politicians, and to purchase legislation, to purchase tax breaks, and we are getting poorer and more desperate and more despair. I mean, people are living in abject despair. And it's all because the game is rigged for the very, very wealthy who buy literally human beings. I mean, if you look at it, the sympathetic way of looking at Donald Trump for you maggots is that he is a very high-priced call girl. That's what he is. And that's a very nice way of putting it, because I could say it a lot dirtier and a lot nastier and a lot uglier. But that's what he is. Doug in Denver.
Hi, Randy.
Hi.
I want to let you know first, I listen to you on the PV network in my car driving home.
Oh, Progressive Voices. Okay.
Yeah, and Bluetooth with my phone onto the car, and it's wonderful. So,
good.
Anyway, but that's how I listen to you. But I had a thought about the State of the Union tonight.
All right.
I think that the Democrats ought to have a bunch of empty seats for all of the Trump administration officials that are in prison and can't attend tonight.
I don't think that they. I don't think they do. I don't think they give the seat assignments. But if they did, that would be great. I think it's the sergeant at arms. The one that's going to walk in and say, "Mr. Speaker." Or he's going to say, "Matt." Oh, that's cool. He's going to say, "Madam Speaker."
That's right.
Yeah, he is.
Right.
Because it's Nancy's house now. But yeah, I don't think they give the seat assignments. You know what I'm watching for? I want to see how much these young, new, freshman House members can tolerate before they get up and walk out or yell something at him and goad him into getting off script and goad him into some sort of a fight. Because that'd be the only fun thing to watch. Joe Wilson started this with the "you lie" at Barack Obama.
There you go.
And,
that's right.
Right? And so, turnabout is fair play. I just can't imagine them sitting there, just quiet when he starts talking about rapists and murderers. I just can't.
Yep. I hope.
I know Nancy probably had a nice little confab today, especially with the Progressive Caucus, especially with, Miss Tlaib and with, Miss Cortez and some of the other, freshmen. And probably told them to take the high road and to keep their dignity and blah, blah, blah. But I don't know how much they can take. I really don't. So we'll see how off the rails he goes. Now, just remember, when he says unity, he means I want everyone to agree with me. That's what unity means to him. When he says greatness, he means recognize him as being the greatest president ever. Of the more than 2 years, he's done nothing except one tax cut for the uber wealthy. That is it. Buy a stinking podcast.